including potential assessments. More information is available at citizensfla.com or by contacting a Citizens agent. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and on today's First Coast Connect, we ask officials behind a proposed bioethanol plant in Fernandina Beach why they pressured residents to drop their legal challenge of the project and why they believe it's good business for the city. Then, Jacksonville's own folk art Smithsonian gets city recognition. We explore the history of the Whetstonian building and the mystery of its eclectic owner. And a golf event in the memory of a local Parkinson's advocate raises money for locals with the progressive neurological disease. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. President-elect Donald Trump is set to visit the White House today at the invitation of President Biden. Trump may also visit Capitol Hill this morning. This comes as Trump announces choices for his next administration. NPR's Franco Ordonez says that includes Fox News host Pete Hegseth for Defense Secretary.
It's not unusual for presidents to pull from out of, different constituencies, but this is really an out-of-box kind of pick. The Defense Secretary leads over 1 million active duties troops. Hegseth is a decorated veteran, but lacks the management and high-profile national security experience. That said, Trump really cares a lot about who those can present well on TV.
NPR's Franco Ordonez reporting. Supporters of Donald Trump say they were pleased to see him win the swing state of Pennsylvania Election Day. From member station WHYY, Carmen Russell-Sluchansky spoke to some who voted for Trump in Reading, a Hispanic-majority city both Trump and Vice President Harris visited at the end of the campaign.
President-elect Donald Trump won the vote in Reading, where more than 70% of the population is Hispanic. He garnered more than 54% of the vote, an 18-point increase over 2020. Joseph Nunez, who is Dominican-American and represents Reading in the Berks County Republican Committee, says that is a testament to organizing on the ground.
I'm proud of every Latino person that stepped out and said, we're going to try something different this time.
Trump visited Reading twice in the month before the election, which also likely boosted his support here. For NPR News, I'm Carmen Russell-Sluchansky in Reading, Pennsylvania.
The government says consumer prices rose slightly last month by 0.2% on an annualized basis. It went up from 2.4 to 2.6%. Concern over consumer prices was a key item cited by voters in last week's election. The Federal Aviation Administration is banning American air carriers from landing in Haiti. At least 3 aircraft have been hit by gunfire this week. American Airlines says an inspection of one of its jets found a bullet impact in the jet's tail section after it returned from Port-au-Prince to Miami. NPR's Ada Peralta reports the FAA's decision comes after 2 other U.S. aircraft were also hit.
Haiti is in the middle of another chapter of political instability. Its transitional government has failed to stop the advance of gangs, and a majority of them decided to fire their prime minister. A new prime minister has taken over, but gangs have been rampaging across neighborhoods in the capital, Port-au-Prince. On Monday, as 2 American planes approached the runway at the airport, the planes faced gunfire. A flight attendant was injured on a Spirit Airlines flight, which was diverted to the Dominican Republic, and a JetBlue plane only found out it was hit when it was inspected in New York. The ban will remain in place for 30 days. Ada Peralta, NPR News, Mexico City.
You're listening to NPR.
And this is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. An undercover investigation spurred by an anonymous complaint ends with the arrest of 13 people on drug trafficking and possession charges. Numerous raids in the Kin-Knight Drive area during the 18-month-long Operation Nightfall also resulted in the seizure of nearly 2 pounds of fentanyl, powdered cocaine, and methamphetamine, and 16 guns. Jacksonville Sheriff T.K. Waters says guns and violence are woven into the fabric of the illegal narcotics trade.
And crime guns are repeatedly used by violent criminals and traded on the street. This agency will continue to locate and dismantle drug operations in Jacksonville. We do this not only to remove the poison that fuels overdose deaths and addiction, but also to remove the accelerant which ignites violence in our community. According to Waters, 3 of the guns found in the raids were used in local shootings. None of those arrested, Waters says, were involved in gangs. The makeup of the St. Johns County Commission will change next week once 2 newly elected commissioners are sworn into office. The pair campaigned on slowing the area's rapid growth. One of the new commissioners, Ann Taylor, says she sees her election as a referendum on the previous council's actions. You can read more about Ann Taylor and Clay Murphy and how the 2 new St. Johns County commissioners intend to make good on their campaign promises at jaxtoday.org. This afternoon, we're going to have highs in the upper 70s under partly sunny skies with breezy conditions. Winds will be from the east and just a slight chance for rain late this afternoon on your drive home from work. Overnight highs in the upper 60s.
Our stations. Other contributors include Indeed, designed to be an end-to-end hiring solution for businesses of all sizes to attract, interview, and hire candidates, all from one platform. Learn more at Indeed.com/NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, a proposed bioethanol manufacturing plant in the heart of Fernandina Beach is causing community concerns about potential disruption. Today, we ask the project's managers why they believe it's good for the city despite the pushback. Later in the program, an iconic folk art building in downtown Jacksonville is designated a historic landmark. We talked to a local author about its storied past and the eclectic artist who called it home. But first, a political upset in Fernandina Beach city elections last week followed months of controversy over a proposed chemical fermentation plant in the city center. The bioethanol plant is a vision of Rainier Advanced Materials Incorporated, or RYAM, the company that owns one of 2 pulp mills in Fernandina Beach. To discuss it, we're joined by Debra Lane, the company's Vice President of Environmental Affairs. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
We're also joined by Mark Homans, RYAM's Senior Director of Project Management. Welcome back, Mark.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, Mark, let's start out with these recent elections. The mayor and the vice mayor of Fernandina Beach were voted out. Kind of a big deal since the mayor is the son of Congressman Aaron Bean. A lot of people think it's largely due to the controversy over this plant. Both the mayor and the vice mayor supported the bioethanol plant. Everyone in office now is either against or really not in love with the bioethanol plant. So how do you think that this proposed project played into the politics of city governance?
You know, I can't speculate on that. I'm not a politician. I'm an engineer, and the project's made up of engineers and scientists. And frankly, it shouldn't matter, who's in the seat of the city commission or even the city staff for that matter. When we're ready, we'll present the project to the city. And so the expectation is that they'll follow their process and evaluate our application fairly and objectively. And, we anticipate that to come very soon.
And we should be clear that the commission doesn't really have a vote in this, right? This is a decision that will be made by the city manager and by the zoning officials.
Our understanding is it should not come to a vote. Their process includes a review through the technical review committee, which is mostly the city staff. And there's a couple of steps of feedback, that you get based on your application. And it is part of a public process as well.
You already have your permit from the Department of Environmental Protection. So that process has ended.
That's correct.
Yeah. And so, Debra, you wrote a letter to the Fernandina Beach News Leader. You compared this process, it's a fermentation process. You kind of compared it to beer. So explain to us how that metaphor applies.
It is a natural fermentation process, exactly the same process that you use to create beer or distilled spirits. You use bacteria, yeast, to ferment the sugars that are available in our spent pulping liquor. And then you dry that process. You basically are using a physical separation process to take the water out. That's also what happens in the manufacture of distilled spirits.
But this is a chemical process, and that matters, right? I mean, this is a process that's described in the permit itself as a chemical manufacturing of bioethanol by fermentation.
It is not a chemical manufacturing process in the sense that we're manipulating chemistry to make the process. It's a natural fermentation process. That code that's used in the air permit application is just an artifact of the way that EPA sorts emissions for their national databases. If you notice, if you go through that same process, there's a separate line for ethanol manufactured by the chemical manufacturing process, which is completely different from what we're going to be doing.
But the city's land use code prohibits chemical manufacturing. I mean, that is a forbidden use. So that distinction is no doubt going to be pretty central to the city's decision about whether or not to allow this project to go forward.
The city, like Mark said, will have to review the application that we're going to submit to the city and determine whether the project is consistent with the city's land development code. But that's a process that they're obligated to follow, and it's unrelated to what information was in the air permit application. That application doesn't have all of the information that the city needs.
But the city did ask an attorney, its own attorney, to find a firm to evaluate whether or not this met the definition of a chemical manufacturing process. And that independent attorney or land use, evaluator did determine that it was a chemical manufacturing process.
Again, Weiss Sirota made their opinion on the basis of the air permit application that was submitted. So the city can't rely only on that. They have to look at the entire application that we submit. It's kind of like saying that if we submitted an application for registration for our vehicle, that the motor vehicle people could deny us a driver's license on the basis of that vehicle registration. But it doesn't have the information they need to know to determine whether I know how to drive a car.
Gotcha. Mark, the last time you were here, we discussed this project. At the time, you were not able to talk about the emissions component because that was the subject of an administrative challenge by some citizens in Fernandina Beach. And that's sort of like a legal process, and you didn't want to step into that. But I would guess that process is over. The administrative hearing is no longer going to happen. So if we can, let's discuss, RYAM claims that there will be a reduction in air pollution with this project, the bioethanol plant. But in making that calculation, it uses data from 2014 instead of its most recent emissions data. And some people have said that sets the wrong baseline. If you used current emission data, there would actually be a net increase.
Yeah. Let me speak to that, Mark.
Go ahead,
Sure.
And so Ann, I've been doing air permitting for almost 40 years. I started my career working for a state regulatory agency doing air permitting, and I've stayed involved with that. So, so I was very involved in reviewing this permit application before we submitted it. Air permitting is extraordinarily complicated. EPA itself has written thousands of pages of guidance documents on how that program should be interpreted, how applications should be done, how they should be evaluated by the agencies. So those baseline determinations are based on EPA's own guidance and directions. We have to look at several scenarios when we do that permitting. And in those scenarios, it is appropriate to go back and look at that baseline because looking at some of the future scenarios, those are apples and apples comparisons. The fact is, we're going to remove sugars that are currently part of the waste stream that gets burned in a recovery boiler. When we remove those sugars, that won't be burned, and so there will not be the emissions that are associated with those sugars. Our actual emissions will decrease by 5 to 10 tons a year as a result of this project.
But why not use current data?
We use current data where that's appropriate, and in looking at the actual emissions decreases, we are basing that on current data.
Is it fair to say that if you used baseline data from 2021 or 2020, that you would see a reduction in emissions?
Absolutely. We will see an actual emissions reduction. But because of the nuances of the way permits have to be considered and looking at all the possible scenarios, you can't mix those up in the way you do the baseline analysis.
We are talking to officials from RYAM about a proposed bioethanol plant in Fernandina Beach, and we are taking your calls and questions. You can reach us at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at wjct.org or reach out on social media. We have a call from Sandy in Fernandina Beach. Good morning, Sandy. Go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Hi. Yes. My question is two-part. Mr. Homan, you sent a letter to the Fernandina Beach City Commission 8 years ago that you signed saying you would not produce bioethanol. Now you're going back on the promise. How can the community trust RYAM after breaking this promise? And secondly, RYAM has had 3 fires in the last 2 years. One 2 years ago in France, one just a few months ago at your Jessup, Georgia plant, and one just over a week ago right here in Fernandina. How is the community supposed to trust you given this kind of public safety record?
Thanks, Sandy. Mark, do you want to take that?
Sure. And let me explain what I believe Sandy is referring to. That was a letter on behalf of Lignitech Florida, which is another business we have there within the Fernandina footprint, in which a question from the community was asked in the potential phase 2 for that project, was bioethanol being considered? And the answer was no, and that is still true today. This is not a Lignitech Florida project. This is a RYAM project, and this project can exist with or without Lignitech Florida. I think as it relates to safety.
I want to stop you there
Sure.
before we move on to the fire question. So RYAM created Lignotech along with a company called Beauregard. Is
It's a
that
joint
true?
venture, yes.
Yeah. And so when you're speaking for RYAM and saying there won't be a bioethanol plant, how does that change in just a few years?
The question was about Lignitech Florida. It is a separate and independent business.
But you were answering the question.
I was answering because I was a temporary official for Lignitech at the time. That answer was on Lignitech paper. And that answer is still true, that their second phase of that project would not include bioethanol.
Can you see why that would be seen by some in the community as perhaps less than completely transparent? I mean, if you're speaking for Lignotech because you're temporarily working for Lignotech, but you actually work for RYAM and you're answering the question, will there be a bioethanol plant? And you say no. Can you see why some of the community might think that that's a little bit of a two-step?
That may be how they characterize it, but again, the sugars have always existed, in the process, and this process can exist with or without Lignitech Florida.
Explain what that means. The bioethanol can exist without
Yes.
Lignotech?
Yes.
The fact is that our process will take the liquor that already exists and has the sugars in it. We will run it through a fermentation process. That liquor will then be returned to the normal steps of our pulping process. And from there, it will either be burned in our recovery boiler or sold to Lignitech Florida. So the Lignitech business is independent of what we're doing to try to make better use of the products that we generate, the co-products that we generate, and to improve the environmental impacts around the facility.
But you don't think that it would be confusing or misleading for an official of RYAM to say there wouldn't be a bioethanol plant in a few years when there is now
There
going
was
to be?
nothing confusing or misleading about that. The question was specific to what Lignotech's intentions were, because people were determining whether they wanted to support the Lignotech operation or not. And we answered that question. We did not have this plan at the time to produce the bioethanol. It wouldn't have been economical. Now it is, because there's a desire in the world to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to do that in a way that doesn't use food stocks. So this is a 2G process that doesn't make the ethanol out of food products like corn.
Yeah. And so we sort of alluded to the fact that there was an administrative challenge filed by a couple of residents to this. And recently we had some of the people behind that on the program. They say that they were sort of strong-armed to drop that case because RYAM threatened significant financial sanctions. I mean, basically the cost of their legal battle, which could have been in the realm of about $300,000 was their estimate, would be a lot of money for any citizen to have to shoulder if those sanctions were applied. Explain why RYAM chose to use that technique to get this administrative challenge to be dropped.
Yeah, I'll take that one. when someone wants to bring a legal challenge to a permit, they have to have a factual basis for that challenge. When the petition was originally filed, the state agreed to let it go forward because they wanted to hear what that factual basis was, and that made sense. Well, we went through the process, and it became very apparent that the basis for that challenge was incorrect assumptions based on review of our air permit application and incorrect calculations and application of the law by people who had no experience whatsoever doing air permitting. Once that's known, then that becomes what court can consider a frivolous challenge. And in that case, Florida rules allow for the party that is having to deal with that challenge to recover their legal fees from the petitioner if the petitioner wants to go forward when they know they have no basis in fact and data for their challenge. So all we did was make Mr. Budd, the petitioner, aware of that rule in the Florida rules and made him aware that we could pursue legal fees. We didn't provide any estimates of how much that would be, but we did make him aware that that's an option under Florida rules that applies to anybody that has to deal with a legal challenge.
And that's and the company believes that that's like a fair approach when dealing with a citizen complaint.
This is not just dealing with a citizen complaint. That's a fair approach available to anybody that's dealing with a legal challenge in Florida. And it's reasonable not to tie up the courts and tie up all of the resources to continue a challenge once you know that your challenge isn't based in fact. If Mr. Budd and and his attorney felt like they had a strong case, we'd still have that court hearing on the calendar. So the fact that they're able to stand out in public and make certain allegations doesn't mean that they have a basis to carry those through and be able to prove their case in court.
Well, let's talk about one of the elements of that challenge. I mean, one of the things that concerned the residents and was in their petition for an administrative hearing was this use of the word additional. There is a phrase in the permit that says that there will be an additional 100,000 tons of this fuel that's produced, this sort of waste byproduct produced, an additional 100,000 tons provided to Lignotech from RYAM. The word additional to most of us means more or extra, right? And the petition says there's going to be 100,000 tons additional of this liquor. So how would not that indicate that there is additional waste product that is going to be generated by this product? Would that not be the understanding and the definition of the word additional?
Yeah, I think that was one of the fundamental misunderstandings of the permit. In fact, and that's a corollary to misunderstanding, how much they're actually producing today and what their maximum potential is. They're permitted to do up to 100,000, but there was never meant to be another 100,000 added to what they do today.
What are they producing today?
So they've been consuming on average about 80,000.
Okay, and so their permit allows them up to 100,000.
Up to 100.
Why does the new permit say an additional 100,000?
The permit doesn't authorize them an additional 100,000. It keeps them to the same levels. We're not making any changes to what Lignotech Florida will do.
The language by DEP says projected future demand for the Lignotech plant is an estimated as an additional 100,000 tons of SSL. That's the spent sulfite liquor, the waste byproduct. So that's the wording that DEP uses is additional.
Remember, the Lignotech Florida has its own operating permit because they're a separate entity from us. They have their own operating permit, and their operating permit has caps on the amount of production.
Why is that word in there then?
It's just an artifact of the way that process is evaluated and the way that we calculate what goes where in the process and communicate about that. There is no change to the amount of liquor that we will send to Lignotech as a result of this project or any other reason. They would have to go get a new permit.
Okay. We've got a call from Medardo. I believe that's Medardo Manzan. He is one of the two people that kind of helped bring this challenge. Good morning, Medardo. Go ahead.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Hello?
Go ahead, Medardo.
Hello?
We're going to have to put you on hold. I don't think that we're able to take that call right now. So let's talk about the benefits of this project is, as you see it, Mark, you have done some presentations, some community meetings. There is concern about the nature of this project. There's concern about it possibly being, flammable, but you believe that it is ultimately a net good. So explain why that is.
I do. And as you said, through the development of the project over the past year or so, through these engineering phases, we've been transparent, in terms of, the information that's been available at that time. And I've done many, many presentations. I've spoke to hundreds of people. And it's pretty clear to me that the majority of the people are actually for this project when they hear that this is very much an environmentally based project. It's a large investment in RYAM, and which ultimately is cascaded down into the community. It has about 20 new jobs and also helps with sustainability of the 300 other jobs that we have there. So it has a good basis and good foundation. And we've been listening to everybody's concerns around fire safety. And so for that reason, we've spent a good bit of time and with a third-party expert on this to site the facility in such a way that in the event of a worst-case scenario around the ethanol storage tank, that the very unlikely event that all the active and passive safety measures fail and that the containment is not there, which it will be there. We displayed in our recent city town hall what that graphic would look like, and it stays well within our property boundaries and at a great distance away from the rest of the process.
And you're talking about, for instance, if the worst case scenario would be like if the ethanol caught fire somehow.
Correct. So, the study again has shown that there's different impact zones, but that those zones don't go beyond 120 meters. It's basically the length of a football field. So, and that's very important for our employees, right? The safety of our employees are paramount, and so is public safety. So that's important when we look at, potential exposure within those boundaries. But the key is for the community, it's at a safe distance from the rest of the process. So there shouldn't be any connection between the rest of the pulping process and this project because it's nestled into the back end of the property. It's just to give you the scale, it's about 1.5 acres of over 600 acres of property that we have, and it is at a safe distance from both our process and the community.
And the concern there would be because the process involves a lot of things that are themselves hazardous chemicals that could be dangerous if they were to in sight, right? I mean, chlorine dioxide and chlorine, things like that. So you're saying that if a worst case scenario happened with the bioethanol plant and say it just exploded, it wouldn't actually reach those other hazardous chemicals and ignite them?
Let me clarify. The ethanol hazard is flammability, and there are other pulping chemicals in the process, but they're disconnected, right? I think people are conflating the two, and I understand and I can hear that concern in my neighborhood. When we're using sort of fear versus facts, the facts are that it is a safe distance away from the rest of that process.
And so if a worst case scenario were to happen, like an explosion, you're saying that it wouldn't reach those other chemicals and ignite them?
Correct.
Okay, very good. I think we do finally have Medardo back on the line. Go ahead, Medardo.
Hello?
Go ahead, Medardo.
Yes, and good morning. There are many people in Fernandina listening to this program. So I would like to set the record straight concerning the letter by Mark Homans in 2018 concerning no bioethanol. The question that was asked by the citizens had nothing to do with Lignotech. I think Mark Homans well knows that the Land Development Code had to be modified to allow Lignotech to exist. And the question was, or the concern in the community was whether or not that change would open a Pandora's box and subsequent chemical manufacturing was made. And the way the city commission at the time interpreted that response from both Beauregard and RYAM, and by the way, the letter that Mark is alluding to was signed by him, and under his signature, it specifically reads RYAM. It doesn't read Lignotech. The letterhead was Lignotech, but his signature was representing RYAM. I have contacted already several of the city commissioners that were serving at that time, and that was exactly their understanding. It was a promise that no more chemical manufacturing would come after that, and specifically no bioethanol. So it will be interesting when they apply the permit, expect the then serving city commissioners to make their voice heard, because that's exactly why they approved the project. It was just lignotech, no more chemical manufacturing down the road. And then we have the situation that it's trying to be changed now.
Okay,
so
Medardo.
I just wanted to make that. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I mean, he's saying that the understanding on the part of the city commissioners at the time was that there would be no bioethanol, period.
We can't
speculate on that.
Yeah,
we disagree
really
with Medardo clearly. That was in a list of a number of questions as it relates to the Lignotech project and the application for the Lignotech project. The question was clearly in phase 2, is bioethanol being considered? And the answer was no, that still remains true.
But it is now being considered, and you signed that. Is it true that you signed that document as a RYAM official with RYAM under your name?
It was on Lignotech Florida paper. I was the acting official because Beauregard is a Norwegian company. So I was the acting official. That's why I signed their permit application as well at that point in time.
All right. I want to just briefly touch on the road ahead. I mean, does RYAM believe that there has been enough engagement on this with the community? And would RYAM be willing to have further discussions with people like, Medardo, for instance, in a public forum?
I'm glad you asked that because we feel like we have been transparent. It's been unfortunate that we had this petition challenge. It really did hamper our ability to speak about all things related to the permit, right? And even prohibited us speaking with Medardo and Mr. Budd because we had to do that through attorneys. And it was a complete surprise that they went this way because, we had the open house. I'll back up to March where we had that open house. We spoke to about 170 people, and we followed up with a lot of individuals after that, including Mr. Budd, who we didn't really know, before this. And so there was 2 of our project team members that sat with Mr. Budd the next day at his house, went through all of his questions. Medardo also came to the open house. He didn't have enough time to stick around to, have his questions answered, but we decided to follow up. He gave us a phone number that we tried many times to no avail, and he has our contact information as well. So we had no reason to expect that the next time we would hear from them is through an administrative challenge, right? So that really has hampered our ability to be transparent. Nonetheless, as engineering has been developed, we have had more meetings. Recently had a city town hall where we gave a 30-minute presentation, and we're starting to share, more details that are available. And then when we make the application, for the process, we will explain why it is consistent with the comprehensive plan. We will go through all the safety measures. We'll explain the economic value and all the other touch points it has for the city. So there'll be more detail to come in that application.
Debra, anything else that you want to touch on this project before you have to head back out of town?
Well, I think we just want to reiterate it. Mark said it earlier when we were sitting out in the waiting area. It's not often that we come across projects that have an environmental benefit baked into a project like this one does. And when we can take advantage of those projects and, improve our environmental impacts at the same time, that's a win for everybody. Like I said earlier, I have almost a 40-year career in environmental protection. And so I'm really excited about this project. I'm excited about where it takes us, and I know that we can do it in a way that works well for our community.
Well, I appreciate both of you coming down to talk about this today. Debra Lane, Mark Homans, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, Jacksonville's own folk art Smithsonian gets city recognition. Welcome back. Well, it's long been a local curiosity, but after a city council vote last night, it will soon be a local landmark. Here to unravel the history and mystery of the Whetstonian building at the corner of Union and Jefferson Streets in downtown Jacksonville is local author and historian Tim Gilmore. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Ann.
So many people have driven past this eclectic-looking building and wondered, what is it? And you actually stopped once to find out and ended up writing a lot about it. Tell us, first of all, what this building looks like and why it's such an interesting, eye-catching vision in the city.
It's hard to describe, but so many people, as you've said, have seen it. If you start describing it, they go, oh, I know what you're talking about. It's more than one building. The main building is a brick two-story building on the corner of Jefferson and Union Street. And then beside that is a smaller 1960s era insurance building. And that is on the corner of Jefferson and State, yeah. And at one point, there were actually some shotgun houses in between those two buildings. Those are gone now. But Walter Whetstone, who...
And we should say we're showing some images now. If people are watching on the live stream, they can kind of see some of your pictures.
Okay, great. Yeah. Walter Whetstone named it the Whetstonian. He was a retired... he did a lot of things in his life, insurance salesman, but... he, to my mind, is people have been saying folk artist. I've often use the phrase outsider artist. And he had decades of salvage things he had picked up here and there, all sorts of things, and he wove them into the complex of buildings there. I mean, he made them. This isn't just a place where these things are displayed, but they are actually made part of the totality of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So when you go by, you might notice mannequin legs. You might notice the interior of a piano that's made part of a wall. You might notice glass bottles. You might notice a head of Harriet Tubman. Just all kinds of things. I don't think anybody is. I don't know if Walter had it inventoried in his head. There's so much there.
There is stories that you've written, stories that the Florida Times Union has written. They describe just a kind of a mosaic of items. I mean, he also did mosaics on the walls, but items that include, La Villa signs and carousel horses and antique clocks and trombones and saxophones and flugelhorns hanging from the ceiling.
Lots of musical instruments.
Yeah. I guess you found out that his dad used to sort of collect stuff, and he just kind of picked up the habit.
Yeah, his dad drove an ice truck, and he would drive around and pick things up, and he told me that he picked that habit up from his dad. And to what you alluded to a minute ago, I wondered what in the world this strange place was lots of times, and I think it was about 2012. When I first wrote about it, because I stopped by, I saw him sitting outside. I didn't know him at the time, and he would do this. He would sit outside of this strange, fascinating place in the middle of summer, wearing a white dress shirt, and I just I parked and I walked up to him and asked him what the place was. And he said, "Come on inside." And I was like, "What? Really?" And he was so open and welcoming, and he wanted people to see it. He was kind. He was gentle. He was really funny. He had just this great sense of humor. He called it the Whetstonian. He said, if Smithson can have the Smithsonian, then Whetstone can have the Whetstonian. One day I went by, he was wearing there's Whetstone chocolates in St. Augustine. And one day I went by and he's wearing a Whetstone chocolates hat, and I commented on it, and he said he went there and said, "You're Whetstone chocolate and I'm chocolate Whetstone." And he said he would
because
say
he's a black man,
right?
I guess his joke there, right?
Yeah, that's his joke. Yep. He would say things like, there's a lot of black history around here, including me, and Yeah, he was just a wonderful personality.
So, one of the reasons that the city council has chosen to recognize the historic value of this building is the building, but also its place in La Villa, which is a place that, as you've reported on and written about at great length, was largely destroyed during urban renewal.
Right.
It's called the River City Renaissance. And basically, that involved taking down most of the buildings in La Villa, which was a historic and at one time thriving Black community in Jacksonville. It was actually kind of a suburb of Jacksonville.
Yeah,
It's pretty much downtown, but
that's true. That's true. Yeah, when Jacksonville was just this, postage stamp that is now part of downtown. Not even all of what we think of as downtown. La Villa was a suburb of Jacksonville in the 1800s. That's true. And of course, so many people have written about the rich musical history of La Villa. Now famous musicians like a ragtime blues musician, Blind Blake, played there and lived there, or lived in Brooklyn, right next to La Villa. And famous musicians ranging from Jelly Roll Morton to Ella Fitzgerald came through La Villa, spent time there.
Ray Charles.
Absolutely, Ray Charles. Yeah. So it does have this incredible history. It also suffered what so many urban Black neighborhoods suffered in the middle of the 20th century. And by the early 1990s, Mayor Ed Austin's River City Renaissance Plan included raising something like 30 square blocks, more than that, I think, actually, of La Villa. There are a few of the old buildings left, including the Whetstonian. He bought the buildings in the late 90s. He told me that the sewage lines had already been disconnected by the city, and he had to pay to have them reconnected. And so
was his goal like saving the building because La Villa was being torn down, or did he just happen upon it and it seemed to suit him?
I think it's more the latter, but it's I think it's a mix of both. I don't know that he had in mind to do this to do preservation, and obviously he altered the building, extensively.
Sure.
So for preservation purists, that would not have been ideal, but he made it into not just a historic a building that's historically significant, but a work of art. So I think most of us who appreciate the Whetstonian that way would say that he greatly improved it beyond the historical significance it already would have had.
And there really are very few original La Villa buildings left. I mean, there's a few shotgun houses that were preserved, the old Brewster Hospital, which has been restored, the Ritz, which has the original wall.
The original wall, right.
The Clara White Mission, and
Clara
that's
White Mission.
about it.
There's a few things here and there. There's a house, I've written about this on my website too, JaxPsychoGeo, that Pedrica Mendez lives in downtown.
Beautiful old house.
La Villa, beautiful old house. Yeah, but there's not many.
So Whetstone's creation, I mean, some people have compared it to kind of a Howard Finster Paradise Gardens type thing, where he's just kind of adorning and adding and creating, and so it's a special place in that way. Did he regard himself as an artist?
He did not. No. I talked to him about that, and he laughed at the idea of himself as an artist. What
did he? Did you just think he was a collector? Like, what did he think he was doing? Because he wasn't just.
That's a good question.
He wasn't just displaying it, as you say. He was kind of making it into something else.
I mean, he had a vision. I never heard him exactly characterize it. But I think people have when they hear art or artist. Sometimes they have certain connotations that don't fit what they think of themselves. So the reference to Howard Finster, this is why I've always thought of Walter Whetstone as an outsider artist. The idea of outsider art, or sometimes it's called art brut, which is French for raw art. is the idea of people who are not trained in the arts, but they create I don't want to say manically because that sounds like it has
But kind of compulsively.
Compulsively, that's the right word. Yeah. And there are people like Howard Finster in Athens, Georgia, with his Paradise Garden, or Eddie Owens Martin, who called himself Saint Eom, and built this very strange, wonderful place called Passaquan near Columbus, Georgia. I went on a road trip with Wayne Wood and several other people. Wayne Wood led the road trip.
Local historian Wayne Wood, yeah.
About 8 years ago or so. Simone Rodia, who built the Watts Towers in L.A. These are people who, they didn't go to art school. They did not think in terms of an art career. They did very strange things or outside the artistic norms or any other kind of norms. But there's no way that you could look at what they did and see it as anything but creative, visionary. Even if you don't get the vision, you have to see that there's vision there.
Yeah. And so he was actually featured on the History Channel's American Pickers show.
Right.
So it wasn't that people didn't recognize there was sort of something really unique in this Jacksonville space.
Toward the end, he passed away in 2018. He had a few strokes. He was 81 years old. Toward the end, he would have yard sales or whatever you want to call them there, and people would come by and buy pieces out of his collection. And I've actually never watched that episode, that American Pickers.
I get the sense
episode.
you're not a fan of the Enterprise.
So many people are. To me, they're digress for just a second and bring it back to this. There are these outside the Whetstonian. There are these two big tin plates that are on poles, and both of them have quotes from architects. One of them has a quote from the architect Mies van der Rohe that says, "The structure is the whole from top to bottom to the last detail with the same ideas." The other one is a Frank Lloyd Wright quote. Says, "Every curve and line has to have real meaning. It cannot be arbitrary." I don't know where Walt got these things, but to me, they apply to the Whetstonian. There's an overall vision there that you can see in each of the parts of the thing. So I get people wanting to buy this strange piece of it and that strange piece of it, and the American Pickers kind of enterprise. I understand that. Personally, I would really like to see it be preserved as Walt's vision.
Yeah. And so with the historic designation, I mean, what does that provide for, and just kind of briefly, because we don't have a ton of time left, but what does it mean for the building? I'm guessing historic preservation is a bit of a challenge sometimes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And of course, there are historic preservation pioneers in this town that are heroes, I'm glad that this happened. And his wife, his widow, Dot Whetstone, saw this.
Is she still in the building?
They lived in Springfield. She has a house in Springfield, but she does visit the building at times. I have talked to and heard other people talk about means of saving it throughout the years. I think the Museum of Contemporary Art downtown actually had. There was some thinking there about possibilities of saving it. Arts leaders and preservation leaders in the past have talked about saving it. So I don't know what the future is, but I'm glad that City Council voted the way they voted.
And you guess he'd be glad too?
Yeah, he would. He would. You know, there was I think toward the end, I think there was some sadness in him about people not seeing whatever the vision was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Tim Gilmore, love talking to you about Walter Whetstone. Thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely.
All right. Up next, a fundraiser honors the memory of a passionate Parkinson's advocate.
The second annual Messiah Ballet features Handel's Messiah, performed by the St. Augustine Community Chorus and Grace Conservatory's Ballet Company, Saturday, November 16th at the Jacksonville Center for the Performing Arts. More at messiahballet.org.
Florida State University is a preeminent institution. FSU license plates support scholarships for deserving students who enrich and contribute to our state and nation. Gifts for first-time buyers are online at fsu.edu/mytag.
I killed Dietrichson. Me, Walter Neff, insurance agent, 35 years old, unmarried, no visible scars.
WJCT Public Media invites you to a special screening of Double Indemnity as we celebrate Noir-vember.
The murder's never perfect. Always comes apart sooner or later.
Wednesday, November 13th, Cash Bar, Piano Jazz, and Film Noir. Doors open at 6:30, film screens at 7. Double Indemnity, November 13th, RSVP at wjct.org/events.
Donald Trump said if elected, he would quickly settle the war in Ukraine, impose high tariffs on imports, and work to end the war in Gaza. On the next Fresh Air, we talk with Zanny Minton-Beddoes, editor-in-chief of The Economist, about what to expect from the new administration and what foreign leaders are thinking. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Advocate for people living with Parkinson's disease. Here to talk about Beating Parkinson's One Swing at a Time golf event on November 15th. I'm joined by Greg Hummer. He's president and director of the support group assistance program at Jax Hope Incorporated. Welcome.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for having us.
Welcome back, I should say.
Yeah, welcome.
And Elaine Keebaugh, a geneticist and director of grants and development at Jax Hope Incorporated. Hey, Elaine.
Hi, thanks for having us.
So can we just start out for people who don't know, who was Bill Watson?
So Bill Wilson was
Wilson, I apologize.
Yep, no, he was a former statistician and professor at University of North Florida. He also had Parkinson's disease, and so he sort of had this vision to increase awareness and resources for people impacted by Parkinson's in Jacksonville. And so we are trying to honor his legacy and further his vision.
And so he died in 2020. I understand that when he first got Parkinson's, his own inclination was to sort of hide it and to not acknowledge it.
Yeah, so he, didn't obviously want it to affect his work life and his friends, and he did. But at some point after that, he embraced it and really started to say, hey, we need to make changes in the community so people with this disease and our family who's affected by it know where to go, and there's not this sort of, I don't want to say shame, but just like you don't want to share it with people because it's a quite personal.
Sure. It's personal.
thing.
It can be a very emotional diagnosis for people.
Yeah, and scary and lonely. There's probably a lot of emotions associated with it that fortunately I haven't had to experience yet.
Yeah. So do you have a diagnosis of
No,
Parkinson's?
I'm sorry that I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you come from a family that has any Parkinson's in it?
My family does not have Parkinson's in it. So my father had Alzheimer's, and then I have a mother with essential tremor. So I have some experience in the neurological disorders world, but not specifically with Parkinson's.
And you're a geneticist. Is this a genetic disease? Like, is this an inherited illness or disease?
So for the most part, it's not. About 10% of people with Parkinson's disease do have some form of genetic heritability component in there. But for the most part, we don't know what causes Parkinson's disease.
So, Greg, you have a diagnosis of Parkinson's.
Yes.
And you are an advocate for spreading the word about it, educating people about it. How does somebody like Bill Wilson's work impact the community? What is his legacy?
Well, what he wanted to do is when people get first diagnosed with Parkinson's, like you said, it can be a lonely disease, but we want these people to get connected to a local support group, get involved, exercise, do social activities with other people with Parkinson's. So what it does, the more active they are, the more things they do, it slows down the progression. And sometimes I've even seen where it even stops it or reverses it. I've seen people who go to exercise regularly. They come starting with a wheelchair, then they go to a walker, and then now he's talking about going to a cane because he's improved. So that's just being a resource for people. They have this disease. They don't understand it. They don't know anybody with it. So we try to connect them with a support group in their area. We have 6 support groups in the Jacksonville area, all the way from Palm Coast up to, and then we have one in southern Georgia too that are in our network that we work together. We provide speakers for them and then helping them with exercise programs too.
And I think that one of the problems that Bill discovered is that there can be days where you just don't feel like you've got it in you, that you really have to fight and to force yourself to get out and to either exercise or participate.
Sometimes you learn to lie to yourself. I feel great today. I'm wonderful today. And it works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. So it's just a day-to-day thing. But you've got to do all you can do. You just can't sit around and mope around and feel sorry for yourself.
Right. And so this event is a fundraiser. I mean, what is the funding needed for? How does it sustain Jack's Hope?
To provide resources to the support groups, provide a place where people can go to when they first get diagnosed or a family member gets diagnosed, that they can call and then we can help them. We help them with transportation needs if they have them. And our long-term goal is to have a Bill Wilson Resource Center, an actual building or an office where people can go to, maybe have an exercise room. So that's some things we have in the future.
Okay,
that we're looking for.
Elaine, what is this event? I mean, where is it? How can people participate if they want to? This is the Bill Wilson Memorial Golf Tournament.
Yeah, so the golf tournament is going to be this Friday, November 15th. We tee off at 1 p.m. We have lunch starting at noon, and we still have about 20 spots left. So if people want to come and golf, we'd love to have them. All skill levels are welcome. So we have people with Parkinson's playing. We have golf fanatics playing. We have a lot of high school volunteers coming out to help us. So we invite everyone to come play. And the funds raised from this will go to help keep people moving, keep our exercise programs going. And like Greg mentioned, hopefully eventually have a brick and mortar building.
Excellent. Well, Greg Hummer, Elaine Keebaugh, thanks so much for being here. Have a great event on Friday.
Thank you for having us.
We appreciate your support.
Sure. And that's our program. Thank you for listening. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. If you missed anything, you can hear our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight, or you can find our entire archive at WJCT.org or on your favorite podcast platform. Join us tomorrow when we discuss how you need to prepare for a severe parking shortage ahead of the holiday season at the Jacksonville airport. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Supporter of First Coast Connect, Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or BaptistJax.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected